It started quietly, like most things that changed the course of history. In the far reaches of the Orion sector, a small cluster of dots appeared on the deep space scanners of the Galactic Council's monitoring stations. At first, the technicians thought it was debris, maybe a small convoy of miners returning from the outer rings. But as the readings sharpened, the dots turned into ships, tiny ones, moving in perfect formation. The command center, filled with different alien species from across the galaxy, lit up with chatter. A few officers leaned closer to the holographic display, squinting as if that would help. The ships were so small that most scanners struggled to even register their energy signatures. "Is this a joke?" one of the analysts asked, half smiling. "They call that a fleet?" The supervisor, a tall creature with crystal-like skin, zoomed in further. The ships were sleek, gray, and strangely compact. No huge weapon mounts, no massive shield generators, no heavy armor. Just small shapes cutting through space like needles. Compared to the standard war cruisers that dominated galactic space, these looked like toys. Soon the chatter turned into laughter. A few officers even started placing bets on how long those ships would last in a real fight. No one, not even the most cautious observer, considered them a threat. They were too small, too quiet, too human. It had been centuries since anyone in the Council had even thought about Earth, the old world that most records barely mentioned anymore. Humanity had been written off as a minor civilization, too focused on its own planet and too slow to expand into the stars. The idea that Earth could produce a fleet worth noticing was, frankly, laughable, but the scanners didn't lie. The fleet carried a Terran identification code. The symbol, 3 interlocked circles inside a star, was old but unmistakable. The room went silent for a moment. Then someone chuckled. "Terrans? Impossible. Didn't they vanish after the Sol collapse? Maybe they found an old scrapyard and decided to play war." The mocking continued. Messages began spreading through the galactic network within hours. News outlets posted flashy headlines like "Tiny, Earth fleet enters galactic space," and "Humans attempt interstellar debut with toy ships." Commentators joked that maybe the Terrans were trying to win by confusing their enemies into laughter. But not everyone found it funny. Far away, in the observation deck of a Voran battle station, one commander stood quietly, watching the live feed. He didn't laugh. He remembered a different story, one about humans during the early expansion era. They were stubborn, inventive, and unpredictable. They might not have had the size or power, but they always found strange ways to turn weakness into strength. Still, even he couldn't imagine what those little ships were doing out here now, in one of the most militarized regions of the galaxy. The fleet didn't respond to any of the Council's hails for hours. It just kept moving, steady, silent, and disciplined. When they finally sent a signal, it was short and calm. "This is Terran Fleet Alpha 7, requesting permission to enter the Orion sector for peaceful observation." Peaceful observation. The phrase made most commanders laugh even harder. The Orion sector wasn't a place for observation. It was a border zone, claimed by the Voran Empire, a proud and aggressive species that loved showing off its military power. Anyone who entered their space without permission usually didn't leave. Within minutes, the Vorans sent a response. Their fleet, massive and gleaming with gold armor, moved to intercept the newcomers. The commander of the Voran fleet, known for his arrogance, opened a wide band channel. His deep, gravelly voice echoed through the system. "Terran Fleet Alpha 7, you are entering sovereign Voran territory. Identify your purpose or we will escort you out by force." The humans replied almost instantly. Their voice was calm, almost too calm. "We are not here to challenge anyone. Our mission is peaceful. We only wish to study the sector's magnetic field for scientific purposes." The Voran commander sneered. "Scientific purposes? In a war zone? You must be very brave or very foolish." But the Terran voice didn't change tone. "We understand the risks." Then the channel closed. The human fleet continued to glide through space, ignoring the massive cruisers that now surrounded them. The difference in size was almost comical, like a flock of birds surrounded by dragons. Every Voran ship carried enough firepower to wipe out a city, while the Terran ships were barely larger than shuttles. The galactic press broadcasted the footage live. Billions watched as the so-called small fleet drifted closer to the Voran line. Comment sections filled with jokes, memes, and sarcastic remarks. Did Earth run out of metal? Maybe they're here to sell snacks. Somebody tell them this isn't a museum tour. But inside the Terran command ship, things were very different. The bridge was quiet. The crew moved with calm precision, their eyes locked on their screens. Every system check was run twice. Every calibration was exact. No one looked nervous, not even the commander who sat in the center seat watching the giant Voran fleet ahead. Outside, the Terran ships looked small. Inside, they felt alive. Each vessel was built with something no one else in the galaxy understood yet: adaptive field cores that allowed the ships to bend energy, gravity, and even space itself. The technology wasn't flashy, and it didn't look powerful from the outside. That was the beauty of it. The Terrans had learned something important after centuries of isolation. Power doesn't always mean size. They didn't need massive ships covered in weapons. They needed ships that could outthink their enemies. Still, as the hours passed, tension grew. The Vorans weren't patient by nature. Their commander sent another warning, this time sharper. Terran vessels, you have entered restricted territory. Turn back now or face immediate consequences. The human reply was the same: calm, polite, and firm. Negative, Voran command. Our mission continues. We mean you no harm. The Vorans didn't like being ignored. They began charging their weapons just to make a point. The glow of their plasma cannons reflected off the hulls of the Terran ships like distant lightning. Reporters loved it. It made great visuals for the broadcast. Brave or stupid? The headlines asked. How long can the humans last? On one of the Terran ships, a young technician looked up from her console. Sir, she said quietly, they're locking on. The commander didn't flinch. Hold position. But hold position. The order spread across the fleet and not a single ship moved. The Vorans fired a warning shot, a bright beam that roared past the Terran formation. The humans didn't even twitch. They just stayed there, motionless like a wall of silver shadows. That silence unnerved the Vorans more than any threat could have. No one had ever stood so calmly in front of them before. Every other race either ran or begged for mercy. But these humans? They just watched, quietly, like they knew something the others didn't. The standoff lasted the entire night cycle. When the council reviewed the footage later, they called it the still moment. No one fired again. No one backed down. When dawn came over the Orion star, the Terran fleet finally moved. Slowly, gracefully, it adjusted formation and began scanning the asteroid field nearby. Just as they had said they would, the Vorans followed, confused and cautious. They couldn't tell if it was bravery or madness. Across the galaxy, people kept watching, waiting for the punchline, waiting for the little ships to be destroyed. But the punchline never came. What came instead was a question, one that began whispering across the halls of the council. Who were these humans now? They weren't supposed to have this kind of confidence. They weren't supposed to be here at all. And yet there they were, small, silent, and fearless, floating in front of one of the most feared armies in the galaxy, acting as if they belonged there. No one realized it then, but that calm, strange moment was the beginning of something much bigger. The laughter that had filled the war rooms was about to stop, because soon everyone would understand that the so-called small fleet wasn't small at all, not in the ways that mattered. It was the start of a story that would shake the galaxy to its core. And it began with those tiny Terran ships, gliding silently through the stars while everyone else laughed. The next day, the entire galaxy was talking about the humans. Every news channel replayed the same footage, the moment when the small Terran fleet stood still against the massive Voran ships. It looked like a joke that somehow refused to end. Viewers expected the humans to panic or flee. Instead, they just floated there, calm as stone. Across hundreds of star systems, people couldn't stop laughing. On entertainment feeds, comedians made skits about the tiny Terran tourists. Animated parodies showed toy ships being chased by giant alien cruisers. Everyone enjoyed the story. It was fun, harmless entertainment, at least for now. But while the galaxy laughed, the real story was unfolding quietly in the command deck of the Voran flagship. The Voran commander sat in silence, staring at the projection in front of him. Dozens of tiny Terran ships glowed faintly on his screen, all perfectly aligned in a triangular formation. They hadn't moved since their last message. Every sensor check said the same thing: low energy output, minimal weapons, outdated engines. But something about the readings didn't add up. Their signal patterns were too clean. Their flight formation was too precise. There was no drift, no delay. No sign of ordinary navigation errors. It was as if the ships were being controlled by one mind. The commander leaned forward and muttered, "Machines that move like this don't belong to fools." His second-in-command gave a nervous laugh. "They're humans, sir. Maybe they just like making a show." The commander didn't answer. He'd fought enough battles to know when something felt off. Meanwhile, inside the Terran fleet, life carried on with quiet discipline. Inside the lead ship, the crew moved with calm efficiency. No one spoke loudly. No one panicked. They worked like a single heartbeat, each person trusting the next. The command officer watched the readings carefully. They had come prepared for mockery. They knew the galaxy would laugh. But they also knew laughter never stopped progress. The Terrans had learned this lesson long ago, back when they still lived on Earth. Whenever someone told them something couldn't be done, they simply went and did it. That stubbornness, that quiet drive to prove others wrong, had never left them. Out here in the middle of alien space, they were proving it again. For hours, the ships continued scanning the asteroid field near the Orion border. Their scanners hummed softly, measuring magnetic currents, solar winds, and gravitational anomalies. To outsiders, it looked boring. But to the Terrans, it was vital. They weren't just exploring. They were mapping something hidden, something the rest of the galaxy hadn't noticed yet. A few Voran officers watched the scans curiously. "What are they doing?" one asked. "Probably pretending to be scientists," another replied. "Or maybe they're lost." But none of them understood that every movement, every reading, was part of a quiet experiment, one that could change the future of space travel itself. By midday, the Voran commander decided to contact them again. "Terran fleet," he said through the wideband channel, "you are still operating inside restricted space. State your true purpose or prepare to be escorted back." The Terran reply came calmly, almost too calmly. "Our mission remains unchanged. We mean no harm. We will leave once our scans are complete." That response only annoyed the commander further. "You think we will just let you wander around here?" There was a brief silence, then the Terran voice said softly, "We have no intention of wandering. Every move we make has purpose." The commander frowned. It wasn't arrogance in the human's voice. It was certainty. He closed the channel and leaned back in his chair, muttering, "They're either very brave or very foolish." While the two fleets kept their distance, the Galactic Council gathered in an emergency session. Representatives from dozens of species filled the chamber. The holographic display in the center showed the small Terran ships surrounded by the massive Voran cruisers. The room buzzed with debate. One counselor said, "If the humans wish to play scientists, let them. They pose no threat." Another snapped back, "No threat? They entered a military zone without permission." A third added, "They must have help. No small planet could build ships like that without someone backing them." Everyone had an opinion, but no one had answers. The humans hadn't asked for permission, hadn't offered trade, and hadn't explained their technology. They just appeared, small, silent, and confident. On the outer rim station, some old traders started whispering strange things. They claimed that months earlier, they'd seen human ships moving faster than light without using standard jump gates. Others said they'd seen Terrans appear near black holes and vanish without trace. No one believed them at the time. But now, watching the footage from Orion, people began to wonder if those rumors were true. Back near the asteroid field, the Varans finally sent a smaller patrol ship to approach the humans. The patrol captain was known for his arrogance. As he moved closer, he opened his broadcast to all channels, making sure everyone could hear. "This is Commander Val of the Varan Empire," he said proudly. "Terran fleet, you are surrounded. Your tiny ships are no match for ours. Do you understand the position you are in?" A pause followed. Then from the Terran ship came a calm reply. "Position is a matter of perspective." That single line made the Varan commander's smile fade. "Perspective?" he repeated. "You speak as if you have a choice." Again, silence. The Terran ships didn't respond. They didn't move. They just stayed there, quiet and unbothered. The Voran patrol circled them several times, scanning for weaknesses, but found nothing unusual. The readings were strange, almost too ordinary, like the ships were hiding something just below the surface. Frustrated, the patrol captain finally barked, "Enjoy your scans while you can, Terrans. The Council won't tolerate your presence much longer." The humans didn't reply. Hours turned into days. The tension around the sector thickened. Reporters called it the silent standoff. Across the galaxy, audiences tuned in daily to see what the humans would do next. Some hoped for a peaceful ending. Others just wanted a good fight. But the humans refused to give either. They simply worked, methodically, patiently, as if time itself was on their side. Inside the lead Terran ship, the crew gathered for a briefing. One officer looked up from the data screen and said quietly, "We're almost done." The readings matched the simulations. The commander nodded. "Good, then we move to Phase 2 soon. Will they let us?" Another asked. The commander smiled slightly. "They don't need to let us. They just need to keep watching." Back in the council chambers, arguments continued. Some wanted to send peace envoys. Others wanted to send warships. A few older diplomats, however, urged caution. "Humans have always been unpredictable," one elder said. "If they came here after centuries of silence, they must have a reason. We should listen before we judge." But the louder voices drowned him out. The galaxy had grown proud, and pride rarely listens to reason. Meanwhile, on the entertainment networks, the jokes still rolled in. Merchants began selling little Terran fleet toy models, tiny silver ships that whirred around when you pressed a button. Children collected them, pretending to fight imaginary alien enemies. No one knew that the real fleet wasn't playing games. Late one night, the Vorn commander received a private message from the Galactic Council. They wanted him to stage a controlled engagement, a mock battle, to demonstrate the superiority of the Council's military forces. The humans, they said, could be invited to participate. It would be a public display of power, nothing dangerous, just a show for the cameras. The commander didn't like the idea. But orders were orders. He contacted the Terran fleet the next morning. "Terran vessels," he said. "The Galactic Council invites you to a friendly combat demonstration. It will be an opportunity to exchange tactics and strengthen diplomatic understanding." Everyone in the control room smirked. They all knew it wasn't a real invitation. It was a trap wrapped in politeness and a chance to embarrass the Terrans publicly. After a moment, the humans responded. "We accept." The room went silent. "Accept just like that? No hesitation, no conditions?" The Voran commander blinked, unsure if he'd heard right. "You accept?" "Yes," came the calm reply. "We will participate, under one condition." The commander raised a brow. "And what condition is that?" The Terran voice replied quietly. "Live fire weapons." "No simulations." The control room erupted in shock. "Did they just ask for live weapons?" Someone whispered. "They'll be destroyed," another said, laughing. "They don't even have real shields." The commander sat back, trying to hide a strange feeling in his chest. Not laughter, not anger, but curiosity. These humans were either incredibly reckless or incredibly sure of themselves. He couldn't tell which one was worse. The broadcast of the announcement spread across the galaxy within minutes. Every major network prepared for what they called the showdown at Orion. Billions tuned in, ready to watch the humans humiliate themselves. But the Terran fleet remained silent, preparing quietly in the cold dark. No boasting, no threats, no drama, just quiet readiness. While the galaxy laughed louder than ever, the humans adjusted their systems, calibrated their mysterious engines, and checked their unknown weapons. They knew the others would underestimate them. That was the plan. And soon the laughter that filled the stars would turn into something else entirely. The announcement of the mock battle spread faster than light. In less than a day, the whole galaxy knew that the humans had accepted the challenge, and that they had asked for live fire. Every news outlet turned it into a spectacle. Animated previews showed the giant golden Voran fleet facing a handful of silver human ships. Analysts called it the most unbalanced contest in history. The betting networks opened odds before the day ended. 99% favored the Vorans. No one, not a single expert, reporter, or military officer, believed the Terrans stood a chance. But the humans didn't seem to care about the odds. They never did. While the galaxy argued and laughed, the Terran fleet prepared in silence. Inside the command ship, every corridor hummed with low energy. Crew members checked systems quietly, adjusting coordinates and synchronizing the data streams that connected the ships together. Their movements were calm, steady, and almost ritual-like. No one seemed nervous. They had trained for this moment for years, maybe even decades. The mission had been planned with precision long before the galaxy had ever noticed them. At the center of the bridge, the commanding officer stood before the viewing screen, watching the distant glow of the Orion star. The star shimmered like a living flame, its magnetic field twisting and pulling at nearby asteroids. Around it, the massive Varan ships moved into formation, huge, bright, and proud. They wanted the show to look good on the cameras. To them, this was entertainment. To the humans, it was a test. A quiet voice broke the silence inside the Terran ship. Fleet system stable. Energy levels at 100%. Good, the commander said softly. Let's make sure the data links stay tight. No one fires unless I give the order. A few of the younger crew members exchanged glances. Some were excited, others nervous, but none spoke. They knew this wasn't a fight they were supposed to win. It was one they were supposed to learn from. But still, a spark of pride flickered behind every calm expression. They weren't afraid to be underestimated. They were counting on it. Far away in the Voran flagship, the mood was completely different. The entire control deck buzzed with energy. Officers joked, laughed, and made bets on how quickly the Terrans would surrender. Some predicted it would take 10 minutes. Others gave them 5. Even the commander, usually stern, couldn't hide his amusement. Let them have their moment, he said. We'll give them a show they'll never forget. His crew laughed, and the entire fleet adjusted its cameras to capture every second of the coming event. The battle would be broadcast live to billions across the galaxy. It was meant to be a demonstration of power. The Varans wanted to remind everyone who ruled the Orion border and what happened to those who dared to enter it. When the day arrived, the two fleets met in open space just beyond the asteroid field. The scene was breathtaking. On one side, the enormous Voran armada stretched across the stars like a golden wall. On the other, the small Terran fleet floated in quiet formation, 12 ships in total, each no larger than a fighter escort. Observers from the Galactic Council floated nearby in neutral vessels, ready to record the friendly demonstration. The official broadcast carried a warm, cheerful tone. Commentators called it a celebration of interstellar cooperation, but everyone watching knew what it really was. A stage for humiliation. The countdown began. 3, 2, 1. The Voran fleet fired first. Bright beams of energy shot through space, glowing like suns. The light washed over the dark void, filling the viewing screens with color. The audience cheered as the beams streaked toward the tiny human ships. But then, something strange happened. The beams hit nothing. For a moment, people thought it was a glitch. The human ships had vanished from the sensors. Not destroyed, gone. The screens blinked and flickered as every scanner across the Voran fleet tried to adjust. Then faint signals reappeared, behind the Voran lines. What? How? Shouted one of the Voran officers. They were right in front of us. The commander leaned forward, staring at his screen. Recalibrate sensors. Lock onto them. But before anyone could respond, a series of bright flashes rippled across the Voran formation. Their targeting systems blinked out one by one. Engines faltered. The giant cruisers drifted slightly off course, their perfect formation collapsing in seconds. No explosions. No debris. Just silence and confusion. The audience watching across the galaxy fell quiet. Commentators froze mid-sentence. No one understood what was happening. On board the Terran ships, the crew worked in perfect coordination. The strange energy that powered their drives glowed softly through the hulls. The ships didn't fire massive beams or missiles. Instead, they released controlled pulses of electromagnetic energy, invisible to the naked eye. Those pulses didn't destroy, they disabled. They confused sensors, shut down weapon systems, and scrambled communications. The Terrans weren't fighting with brute strength. They were fighting with precision and control. Inside the lead ship, a technician spoke calmly. Target lock achieved. All systems neutralized. Good, the commander replied. Hold fire. Maintain position. The Voran commander, meanwhile, stared in disbelief. His fleet's weapons were offline. Shields flickered like dying lights. His communication channels were filled with panic. What kind of technology is this? Someone shouted. It's impossible. They're too small. The commander clenched his fists. Get me a visual now. The screen flickered, and the Terran ships appeared again, hovering silently among the massive cruisers, their small hulls reflecting the golden glow of the Voran fleet. They looked almost peaceful, floating like calm predators among giants. Then came a message. A calm, human voice broadcasted across every channel. Demonstration complete. Requesting ceasefire acknowledgement. The tone wasn't proud or mocking. It was polite, professional. The Varans didn't answer. Most of them couldn't believe what they were seeing. The ships they'd mocked for days had just dismantled one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy, without a single casualty, without a single explosion. The human ships reappeared in a clean triangular formation. Their hulls shimmered faintly, the distortion around them fading. Then one by one they powered down their drives and waited. Finally, the Varan commander opened the channel. His voice was low, uncertain. What did you do?" The Terran reply came gently. "We demonstrated efficiency. You wanted a show. Now you've seen it. No threats, no boasting. Just truth." Across the galaxy, silence spread. The audience who had tuned in to laugh now sat frozen. Commentators stumbled over their words, trying to explain what had happened. Military experts replayed the footage again and again, searching for clues. How had the Terran ships disappeared? How had they reappeared behind the enemy line? How had they disabled an entire fleet without firing a single visible shot? No one had answers. Theories began flooding the networks. Some said it was advanced cloaking technology. Others claimed the Terrans had used experimental teleportation drives. A few even believed it was a trick, an illusion staged by the Council. But the truth was simpler and more terrifying. The Terrans had outgrown the galaxy's understanding of physics. They hadn't returned as explorers or traders. They had returned as innovators, armed with knowledge that others couldn't even begin to grasp. Hours later, the Varan commander called for a private channel with the human leader. When the connection opened, he expected mockery or arrogance. Instead, the human officer's tone was calm and respectful. "You fought with honor," the human said. "No lives were lost." "That is what matters," the commander paused. "You could have destroyed us," the human voice softened. "That's not why we came." Then the channel closed. The human fleet slowly turned and began leaving the Orion sector. Their engines glowed faintly as they disappeared into the stars, quiet, efficient, and unhurried. The Varan ships drifted in silence, systems slowly returning to life. No one spoke. No one laughed. For the first time in centuries, the proud warriors of the Varan Empire had been humbled, not by power, but by control. And somewhere deep in the council chambers, the leaders of 100 species sat in uneasy silence. The laughter that had filled their halls just days earlier had vanished. No one dared to underestimate the humans anymore, because now they knew the Terrans weren't just another small race from a forgotten planet. They were something else, something that thought differently, something that built differently, something that had learned to turn smallness into strength. As the last trace of their ships vanished into the deep dark, a quiet realization spread across the galaxy. The humans hadn't come to ask for permission. They had come to remind everyone that sometimes the smallest fleet in the sky could hold the biggest secret of all, and this the galaxy would never forget. After the battle, space grew strangely quiet. For hours, the golden ships of the Varan Empire floated in the void, their engines flickering back to life one by one. The silence felt heavier than defeat. It was the silence of disbelief, the kind that comes when everything you thought you knew suddenly stops making sense. The crews on the Varan ships whispered to each other, afraid to speak too loudly. How could those small Terran ships, so small and plain, bring down an entire fleet without a single explosion? No one wanted to admit it out loud, but the truth hung in the air like static. They had been outmatched. The command channels were quiet too. The Varan commander sat in his chair, staring at the dark screen in front of him. For years he had believed that size and power ruled the stars. Now 12 small human ships had proven him wrong in front of the whole galaxy. He replayed the footage over and over, trying to find a clue, a trick, a mistake, something that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing. The Terran fleet had simply moved with calm, perfect precision, like they already knew what the enemy would do before it happened. Outside, the wreckage fields were empty. No debris, no sign of battle. Just a few shimmering energy trails left behind by the Terran drives. It didn't even look like a fight had taken place. It looked like a lesson. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, chaos erupted. Every news channel was flooded with the same headlines. Voran fleet neutralized in minutes. Humans shocked the galaxy with unknown technology. The small fleet that defied logic. People who had laughed before now watched the recordings in stunned silence. Commentators who once mocked the Terrans now struggled to explain what they had seen. Every scientist, every strategist, every weapons expert tried to decode the footage, frame by frame, second by second, searching for an explanation. But the answer never came. Even the Galactic Council, who had sponsored the mock battle, couldn't hide their unease. The demonstration had been meant to humiliate the Terrans, a harmless show of superiority. Instead, it had flipped the galaxy upside down. Inside the council chambers, a long table glowed with holographic images of the Terran ships. Dozens of representatives argued loudly. They used forbidden weapons, one shouted. They broke no rule, another replied coldly. Their weapons didn't destroy, they only disabled. Then how did they move like that? How did they vanish from sensors? Maybe they found new energy sources, or something we can't detect. The debate went in circles. Everyone had a theory, but no one had proof. Finally, one of the oldest council members raised a hand for silence. Maybe, he said quietly, we should stop asking how they did it, and start asking why. The room fell silent. Far from the council, the Terran fleet traveled through the dark stretch of space toward their next rendezvous point. They didn't celebrate. They didn't broadcast messages or boast of victory. Inside the ships, the atmosphere was calm. The crew went back to work, collecting data, recording readings, and analyzing the results from the battle. Every action had been carefully planned. Nothing had been random. In the command deck, the officer looked out into space, the stars stretching endlessly ahead. The hum of the engines filled the room. One of the technicians turned to him and said softly, "The galaxy's talking about us." "I know," the officer replied. "They're afraid." "They should be curious, not afraid." "But they won't understand." The officer gave a small, tired smile. "They will. In time." He walked over to the central display. Lines of data glowed softly. Readings from the magnetic fields they'd mapped during the mission. To anyone else, it would look like a scientific report. But to the Terrans, it was something far more important. Hidden inside those readings were the foundations of their greatest achievement. The gravitic drives. Technology that could bend space around the ship instead of moving through it. It was the reason their ships had disappeared and reappeared in an instant. It wasn't magic, it wasn't teleportation. It was physics, mastered in ways the rest of the galaxy hadn't yet imagined. For the Terrans, this was just the beginning. Back in the Orion sector, the Voran Empire faced its first public embarrassment in centuries. For generations, they had been the symbol of dominance, a species that prided itself on its military power. Their fleets were massive, their weapons unmatched. They believed no one could challenge them. But now their leaders were facing tough questions from the Council and their own people. How had a forgotten race from the edge of the galaxy beaten them so easily? In private, the Voran commander submitted a full report. He didn't lie. He didn't try to hide his defeat behind excuses. "The Terrans didn't overpower us," he wrote. "They outthought us. They predicted every move before we made it. Their technology is precise and efficient, but it's their discipline that frightens me. They didn't fight for victory. They fought for understanding." When the Council read the report, many dismissed it as pride-saving nonsense, but a few saw the warning in his words. Days passed. The excitement across the galaxy slowly turned into anxiety. Trade guilds began worrying that Terran technology could disrupt the entire economy. Military leaders whispered about secret alliances. Scientists begged for samples of Terran materials to study, but the Terrans stayed silent. They didn't respond to messages. They didn't attend council meetings. Their fleet had simply vanished, just as quietly as it had appeared. Some said they returned to Earth. Others claimed they'd gone beyond known space. No one knew for sure. Rumors began to spread again, just like before. Stories about small silver ships seen near the edges of black holes, or faint energy signatures matching Terran frequencies. Every sighting added to the mystery. Meanwhile, on one of the Terran ships, the crew gathered in the observation deck. Outside, a blue star shimmered softly, casting gentle light across the room. For the first time since the mission began, the tension was gone. A young navigator stared out at the stars and asked quietly, Do you think they'll ever accept us? The officer turned to look at her. They don't have to accept us, he said. They just need to remember we exist. The navigator smiled faintly. They'll remember. You made sure of that. He shook his head. Not me. All of us. Humanity. They stood in silence for a while, watching the stars drift past. There was peace in the moment, a calm that came from knowing they had done what they came to do. The galaxy had spent centuries laughing at Earth, calling it backward and primitive. But that laughter had pushed humanity to build, to adapt, to evolve quietly in the shadows. They didn't expand through war or conquest. They expanded through knowledge. And now finally they had shown the galaxy what that knowledge could do. Back on the Council's central world, a secret meeting was held. A few high-ranking members gathered in a private chamber, far from the eyes of the media. On the table, holographic models of the Terran ships rotated slowly. One counselor spoke in a low voice. We can't ignore this. If the humans truly possess this level of technology, the balance of power will change. Another nodded. We should approach them with caution. Offer them partnership. A third slammed his hand on the table. Partnership? They humiliated our fleets. They made fools of us in front of the entire galaxy. If they wanted peace, they would have joined us openly. Silence followed. Finally, the eldest among them spoke. Perhaps they have learned what we forgot, that strength isn't always about size. Sometimes it's about control. The others didn't reply. The truth of those words hung heavy in the air. Days later, the official report about the mock battle was quietly archived. The council labeled it a technical anomaly. The public explanation claimed that the Terrans used experimental equipment that interfered with Varan systems. No mention was made of the true power the Terrans had shown. But no one believed the report. Pilots whispered about it in spaceports. Traders discussed it over drinks. Every time someone saw a faint silver flash in the night sky, they wondered if it was them, the small fleet that defied the galaxy. Somewhere, beyond the mapped stars, the Terran ships continued their journey. The commander sat alone on the bridge, watching the endless stretch of darkness ahead. Behind him, the stars of the Orion sector faded slowly from view. Ahead of him, new systems waited, untouched, unexplored, full of secrets. He closed his eyes for a moment and whispered to himself, "They laughed at us once. They won't laugh again." Outside, the fleet shifted formation, 12 small ships gliding in perfect silence. Their engines shimmered with the faint glow of folded space, bending light itself as they vanished into the distance. No explosions. No fanfare. Just quiet progress. And though the galaxy couldn't see them anymore, it would never forget what it had witnessed. Because for the first time in generations, everyone understood something simple, that the smallest fleet in the stars could still change everything. And somewhere, deep in the heart of the universe, the Terrans were already preparing for what came next. Days passed since the battle in the Orion sector, but its echoes had not faded. Across the galaxy, people still talked about the mysterious humans, the small fleet that had faced the great Voran Empire and won without firing a single destructive shot. In every starport, in every mining colony, in every academy where young cadets trained to become officers, the same question was whispered again and again. Who are these Terrans? No one had a clear answer. Some said they were peaceful explorers who accidentally embarrassed a powerful empire. Others believed they were testing secret weapons for a larger invasion. A few even said they weren't humans at all, but something beyond human, something that had evolved far past the rest of the galaxy. No matter what people believed, one thing was certain: the galaxy would never see Earth the same way again. Back on the Voran homeworld, tension filled the air. Their pride had been wounded. The Emperor's Council held daily meetings trying to find an explanation that would save their reputation. Their ships used interference fields. One scientist argued, "It disrupted our targeting systems." "Interference fields can't make ships vanish," another countered. "Then maybe they bent light around their hulls." "That's impossible at their size." The arguments went on and on. None of them made sense. No one dared to say what everyone secretly feared, that the humans were far ahead of them in technology and strategy. To calm the people, the government released an official statement saying the battle had been a technical misunderstanding. They claimed the humans had no hostile intent and that everything was resolved peacefully. But the public didn't buy it. Too many videos, too many eyewitnesses, too many unanswered questions. Even among the Varan soldiers, something had changed. The younger ones began to admire the humans, secretly watching the battle footage and studying their tactics. The older officers saw it as disrespect. They warned their subordinates never to underestimate an opponent again. But the truth was, respect had been born from defeat. In the Galactic Council, the debate continued. Representatives from dozens of planets gathered to discuss what to do next. Should we invite the humans to join the council? One asked. Join? After what they did? Another snapped. They didn't destroy anyone, said a calm voice. They could have, but they didn't. That's exactly why they're dangerous, someone else whispered. The room grew quiet. Everyone knew that power mixed with restraint was the most frightening kind. A race that could win so easily yet chose not to conquer was unpredictable. Finally, the council leader leaned forward and said, "We need to understand them, not fear them. Send envoys. Open communication. If we can't match their strength, perhaps we can learn from their wisdom." The motion passed, but no one knew how to contact the humans. The Terran ships had vanished after the battle, leaving no trace. Their transponders had gone silent. Even long-range sensors picked up nothing. It was as if the small fleet had simply melted into the stars. Far from the Council's reach, in the deep void beyond mapped space, the Terran fleet had regrouped. Their ships drifted silently near the rings of a dying star. Inside the command deck of the lead ship, the atmosphere was calm but heavy. The officers sat around a holographic table showing the aftermath of the Orion encounter. Sensor logs, power readings, and fragments of intercepted communications from other fleets. One of them looked uneasy. "The Council's reaction is spreading fast," he said. "They're calling us unpredictable. Some are even saying we're a threat." The commander listened quietly, eyes fixed on the star outside the viewing window. "That was expected," he said softly. "When people don't understand something, they fear it." Another officer frowned. "Do you think we did the right thing?" The commander turned slowly. "We didn't start that battle, but we showed them what happens when they judge before understanding." The room fell silent. Every crew member understood his words. The Terrans had spent centuries being dismissed, called primitive, weak, irrelevant. For generations, no one had taken Earth seriously, and now, after one brief encounter, the entire galaxy knew their name. But power had never been their goal. Their goal was respect. Later that night, the commander stood alone in the observation bay, watching the light from the dying star shimmer across the hulls of the ships. The faint glow made them look almost ghostly, silent, graceful, untouchable. A young technician approached quietly. "Sir," she said, "the fleet is ready for hyperspace jump." "Where do we go next?" He smiled faintly. "Home." She hesitated. "Earth?" "Yes," he said. "It's time the galaxy learns that home still matters." The technician nodded, though she looked uncertain. "Do you think they'll come looking for us?" "Oh, they will," he said. "Curiosity is stronger than fear. They'll send scouts, maybe ambassadors, but we'll be ready." He turned back to the window, eyes reflecting the starlight. "This isn't just about winning a battle," he continued. "It's about reminding the galaxy that progress doesn't always come from power. It comes from people who never stop learning." The technician smiled slightly. "That sounds like something my teacher used to say." "She was right," he replied. When the Terran fleet finally entered hyperspace, the rings of the dying star shimmered one last time before falling back into silence. Back in the galaxy's core, the rumors continued to grow. Some said the Terrans were hiding powerful weapons in the far reaches of their solar system. Others claimed they had built colonies beyond known space. A few merchants even told stories of trading stations where humans appeared briefly, offering rare minerals and advanced materials, then vanished again before anyone could trace them. Every story added to the mystery. The humans had become legends, the quiet force no one dared to challenge. A few weeks later, the Council finally received a transmission. It wasn't from the Terran government, but from a single ship traveling near the outer rim. The message was short and simple. "We do not seek war, we seek understanding. The universe is vast enough for all of us," that was all it said. No threats, no conditions, no coordinates. The Council debated for days about how to respond. In the end, they decided to send a neutral reply, expressing willingness to discuss trade and research partnerships. But the humans never answered. The message was met with silence. It was almost as if the Terrans had spoken not to negotiate, but to remind the galaxy of something, that peace was a choice, and so was ignorance. Meanwhile, on Earth, life went on quietly. The cities glowed with soft lights under blue skies, and people continued their routines. The news channels back home only mentioned the Orion encounter briefly. For most citizens, it was just another distant political issue. But in the laboratories hidden deep under the planet's surface, the story was very different. Scientists and engineers studied the data from the battle carefully, improving systems, refining the gravitic drives, and developing new defensive fields. They weren't preparing for war. They were preparing for the next step, exploration beyond the known galaxy. Earth had changed over centuries, but one thing had never faded: the human desire to go further. One evening, as the sun set over the Pacific coast, a small group of senior officers met in a glass dome overlooking the ocean. They watched the waves crash gently against the rocks below. "The Council will keep trying to contact us," one of them said. "They'll want our technology," another added. The commander nodded slowly. "They can try. But what they really need isn't our machines. It's our mindset." "What do you mean?" someone asked. He smiled. "They think progress is measured by how big your ships are, how loud your guns sound. But progress is really about understanding, not just how to travel faster, but why we travel at all." The group fell silent, the sound of the sea filling the space between them. Finally, one of them said softly, "Do you think they'll ever understand that?" "Maybe," the commander said, looking out at the horizon. "One day, when they stop laughing." Far above Earth, 12 ships orbited in silence, the same small fleet that had once been mocked as insignificant. Their silver hulls reflected the light of the sun, looking peaceful and calm. Inside, crews worked quietly, maintaining systems and preparing for future missions. There was no celebration, no arrogance, only quiet determination. They knew the galaxy was watching. They knew they had changed something much larger than a single battle, and yet they remained humble. Because deep down they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten, that power without wisdom means nothing, and respect is earned not through fear but through understanding. The Terrans had shown their strength, but their greatest weapon was something invisible: patience. As the Earth turned below them, the commander stood at the window once more, watching the blue planet slowly rotate in the dark. "They laughed at us," he said quietly, almost to himself, "but now they listen." And somewhere in the deep of space, the faint hum of the Terran engines began to rise again, ready to explore, ready to learn, ready to remind the galaxy that small ships can still carry the biggest dreams. Time passed. The battle in the Orion sector slowly turned from news into legend. What was once a shocking event had now become a quiet story told across the galaxy. A story about a small fleet from a forgotten planet that changed everything. In every corner of space, people still spoke about that day. Some told the story to inspire courage. Others used it as a warning. But no matter who told it, the ending was always the same. The humans came, they fought differently, and they left without conquering anyone. They left behind a question that no one had answered yet. Who really are the Terrans? In the deep reaches of space, beyond the Council's control and beyond known charts, the Terran fleet continued its mission. The ships glided silently between distant stars, exploring regions no one had ever mapped before. Inside the command ship, life had returned to normal, quiet, focused, disciplined. The crew members worked like a family now. Every person knew their role. Every system worked in harmony. The commander spent most of his time studying data from the unexplored systems. He often stood near the large window on the deck, looking out at the endless stars. He had seen how quickly fear could spread. One short encounter in Orion had shaken an entire galaxy. But he also knew something else, that curiosity was stronger than fear. And soon others would come looking for answers. That's why the Terrans kept moving forward. They weren't hiding, they were preparing. Far away on the Voran homeworld, change had already begun. The Empire's citizens no longer believed that size and power were everything. The younger generation started studying Terran strategies and designs. Some even formed small research teams to try and understand the gravitic technology the humans had used. At first, the government tried to suppress it, calling it foreign influence, but eventually they gave up. The people's interest was too strong. In schools, teachers began telling students, "Don't laugh at what you don't understand." The phrase became so popular that it was printed on posters and displayed in academies across the empire. It became a quiet reminder of the day the Voran fleet had faced the small Terran ships, and lost. The laughter that once filled the galaxy had faded. Now there was respect. At the Galactic Council, diplomats from different planets still debated about how to deal with the Terrans. Some wanted to reach out again, others wanted to keep their distance. One of the council's senior members finally said, "Maybe they don't want to lead or rule. Maybe they just want to show us something, that our way isn't the only way." The room went quiet. It was a strange idea, but it made sense. For centuries, the council had measured greatness in numbers, how big a fleet was, how many systems a planet controlled, how powerful its weapons were. But the humans had changed that. They had shown that real power wasn't in domination, but in understanding and precision. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued peacefully. The people didn't see themselves as heroes. Most of them didn't even know how much the rest of the galaxy was talking about them. Children went to school, families gathered in parks, and scientists continued their research quietly underground. The world looked ordinary, but behind that calm surface, something extraordinary was happening. In research centers hidden deep within the planet, new technologies were being tested. Faster engines, safer shields, stronger energy systems. The next generation of Terran ships was already being built. They weren't designed for war. They were designed for exploration, for reaching places no one had ever seen. The Earth's leaders had agreed on one thing: humanity's strength wasn't in fighting, but in learning. The Orion encounter had proved that humans could protect themselves. Now it was time to show that they could help others too. One evening in one of those underground laboratories, the commander stood beside a group of engineers. Before them stood a large, sleek vessel, smaller than the old ships, but more advanced in every way. Its hull shimmered softly under the lights, and its engines pulsed with quiet energy. "This one will go farther than any before," an engineer said proudly. The commander nodded. "It's not just about distance," he said. "It's about trust. We're going to need it when we meet them again." "Do you really think they'll reach out to us?" someone asked. He smiled faintly. "They already are, in their own way. Curiosity never dies. It only waits for courage." Months later, small Terran ships began appearing again near border systems, not for battle, but for communication. They visited neutral stations, shared data on cosmic radiation, and even offered help repairing damaged colonies. At first, people were cautious. Some refused to approach. But when they realized the Terrans asked for nothing in return, fear slowly faded. Everywhere they went, the story spread. Humans, the same ones who had once been mocked, were now helping rebuild and explore. In one mining colony, a child pointed to a passing Terran ship and said, "That's the small fleet everyone laughed at." His father smiled and replied, "No one's laughing now. The change didn't happen overnight. It took years. But little by little, the galaxy began to understand. The humans weren't trying to conquer anyone. They were trying to remind everyone that progress came from cooperation, not pride. New alliances started forming. Scientists from other planets requested joint research projects with Terran engineers. Some even traveled to Earth for study. For the first time in centuries, the galaxy was starting to work together. Not because of power, but because of curiosity and respect. On a quiet night aboard the Terran command ship, the commander stood alone once again, looking out into space. The stars looked the same as they always had, endless, cold, silent. But he felt something different now. He knew that somewhere out there, other civilizations were beginning to see things differently. They were no longer laughing. They were learning. He thought of how far humanity had come, from a single blue planet to the stars, from being mocked to being respected. He thought of the people who had built the small fleet, who believed that knowledge could be stronger than fear, and he thought of what might come next. Maybe one day, the galaxy would not be divided by borders or pride. Maybe one day they would all explore together. Side by side, that was the real dream, not to be the strongest, but to inspire others to be better. As the Terran fleet prepared for its next journey, the crew gathered in the observation deck. Outside, a new star system waited, untouched and beautiful. The commander looked around at his crew. "Do you know what makes us different?" he asked. One of them smiled. "We don't give up?" He nodded. "Yes, and we don't look down on anyone, not even those who once looked down on us." The crew smiled. They understood. As the engines began to hum, the commander gave the final order. "Set course. Let's go see what's next." The ships rose in formation, their hulls glowing softly as they aligned with the stars. Then in a flash of light they disappeared, silent, graceful, unstoppable. Back in the Orion sector, people still looked up at the night sky and remembered that day, the day the galaxy learned a simple lesson. Strength wasn't about size. Power wasn't about fear. It was about understanding, patience, and the courage to move forward when everyone else was laughing. Years later, historians would write about the event in their books. They called it the shift, the moment when the galaxy began to change its way of thinking, and every time someone read that story, they found the same line written at the end. They laughed at the small fleet until they realized it was Terran ships. And so, the legend of the Terrans lived on, not as conquerors, not as heroes, but as the quiet force that reminded everyone, no matter how small you seem, you can still change the stars.